Good evening and welcome to the December edition of the Austin Software Cooperatives Meetup Group. We are going to be reviewing the final chapter of Technofeudalism by Yanis Varoufakis, and the chapter is called Escape from Technofeudalism. So the overview of this chapter is he's going to be proposing his um, his answer to techno-feudalism and what we should do about it. He starts out talking about liberalism or a classic liberalism and saying, um, reasoning about things like free thought and how techno-feudalism uh, poses a threat to individualism and free thought and all the things that classic liberalism um, proposed. So here he says techno-feudalism made things infinitely worse when it demolished the fence that used to provide the liberal individual with a refuge from the market. So this market and um, free thought. Originally, people didn't really think that there was any problem between those two things, but cloud capital has shattered the individual into fragments of data and the identity comprised of choices as expressed by clicks, which is its algorithms are able to manipulate. And this is part of his main thesis is that if we're able to be manipulated, then we no longer have a free market. So he's saying that it's going to require a comprehensive reconfiguration of property rights over the increasingly cloud-based instruments of production, distribution, collaboration, and communication. Property rights would be your data, data that's about you. There needs to be some type of movement that reclaims that data so you have control over it. Otherwise, you'll not be uh, uh, a classical liberal individual. So let me know if you all hear echo too. So one of the I guess traditional pushbacks is why not use the tools of social democracy in order to combat techno feudalism, right? So why can't techno feudalism be tamed by politics in the same way capitalism was restrained, at least for a while, by social democratic governments? So it's the answer there. Well, previously, social democrats acted as referees between organized labor and captains of the manufacturing industry. And now that power uh, is much more limited. So it shifted to European, or let's say the European Social Democrats and the American Democrats were lured into a Faustian bargain with the bankers of Wall Street and London and Paris. So what was that? It's a bargain um, where the government freed the social democrats in government freed bankers from the shackles of regulation. They told them to regulate themselves, and this ended up culminating in 2008. The problems of 2008 is what he eventually says. So the old tools of trying to create some type of balance and power, he's saying don't work, or at least using them the way that they used to be used. So cloudalists don't fear powerful unions because the cloud proles are too weak to form them, and the cloud serfs do not even consider themselves as producers. So cloud serfs, in his vernacular, they're the people who produce data. So you're a consumer, and the proles are the workers. So you can be in a warehouse, Amazon warehouse, or so on and so forth. Price regulation doesn't work. He's saying a lot of what is being produced is actually free. So part of what's free is your data. Um, and also breaking things apart, like what they did with the oil companies or maybe the telco companies, uh, is significantly more difficult as far as what he's saying. It's technically difficult. So how do you break up Amazon, Facebook, PayPal? Some of the breakup, let's say in a Google, they're trying to separate what is it, Chrome out of Google right now, but it's just more difficult. Another pushback is cloudalists know they can destroy any third-party developer, so he's calling a cloud a vassal, a cloud vassal. So, let's say someone who's an app developer. They say they are eking out a living on the cloud fiefdom. If they dare contact one of their users directly, so the cloud surf, they without paying the cloud rent, they're going to get some type of pushback or penalty. And there's ample examples of this. Let's say, for instance, with Facebook, if you're a Facebook developer and you did anything that they didn't want, your whole business can be just pushed off the Facebook platform. Compare this to national phone companies, where the national governments force them to charge the same rates when calling company customers of competing companies. How can you force Twitter to share the backlog of all your tweets, photos, and videos with, say, Mastodon? So that would be, it's just more difficult, he's saying, argument. And another part of his argumentation that makes things more difficult is he's saying that now strategy that's been employed from concentrated wealth is what he was calling since deindustrialization. Now we're doing a lot more service based. I don't know how much that matters, but he's saying that the laboring classes. Oh yeah, why that matters is people aren't actually near each other as much. So in order to organize, since people aren't around each other like how they were working side by side in assembly lines, so on and so forth, it's harder to organize. And so now the struggle, um, the class struggle, has been kind of repurposed into what he was calling identity politics. And I guess the whole point here is it's identity, I guess, battling over what he's calling identity politics is not a big threat to the what he's calling the cloudalists or the big corporate concentrated wealth, so on and so forth, because it's not about any of the things that they care about or what changes the what you could call the material conditions or the everyday life of the individual. In order to, traditionally you'd be trying to wrestle, there would be labor trying to wrestle with trying to get more of the profit into their paychecks, and that's less of a priority now. And he's saying that's a loss for the left. So this, he's saying, with social democracy, it's taken some losses. Now here's an interesting chapter, and I could probably stop for some comments here if people want to chime in.
No comments for myself. Sorry if my background's loud, but yeah, I'm just following along so far. the stuff.
Okay. Next chapter is the crypto.
I
Go
was going
ahead.
to say something. It seems like he treats identity politics more as like a distraction that serves the interests of the powers that be. So it's perhaps amplified, and the more you have people in a sense arguing over things that don't disrupt the flow of profit, or of rent in this case, then let them argue. And as a matter of fact, algorithmically let them argue even more. So it's not that the needs of people that are underrepresented or discriminated against aren't taken seriously by the author. He's just saying that it's we become pawns and and argue over things that aren't going to affect, in a sense, the bottom line of the cloudalists. That's my take, at least. So it's kind of more than just recognizing that it's not a threat to them. It's also recognizing that it's a great distraction.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly right. I think he may, I mean, it's a kind of a charged um topic, but I think he also kind of, well, like here he says, tragically, the drive to protect racial, sexual, ethnic, and religious minorities for the reparative justice suits just fine the people in power who like to appear socially liberal.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
enthusiastically embed those causes in their language as long as they only pay lip service to them and do little of substance to protect minorities from the systemic causes of their oppression.
Right.
More, yeah. So that whole part, um, it's if you were to put on your I don't know, concentrated wealth hat and say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm one of these guys, it's a powerful strategy.
But if you think about it, like the trans community is a relatively small community, in the big scheme of things, and probably doesn't have much economic power and is not going to be disrupting anything from that perspective. Um, but to spend $2 million on anti-trans ads and propaganda, that's a lot of fucking money from my perspective. And so
Yeah.
if I think the rule of following the money these days is even more telling than ever. Why spend $2 million on propaganda, and kind of inflaming this issue? So I think that the proactive aspect of the propaganda machine to distract is pretty scary, but powerful on a level that you almost have to be in awe of it and how well it's been working.
Yeah.
I
It,
I yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say this part right here, fragmenting the laboring classes.
Hmm.
There's a whole, there's a kind of a battle within, you can call them the Marxists, the
Hmm.
traditional versus new.
Hmm.
I would say traditional. They have that no one calls themselves a new Marxist, but they have different names.
Hmm.
And the traditional is saying, they like the phrase material conditions. So, what is it that increases your standard of living? And then that should be prioritized for everybody. And then the new is there are other, um, every other group, subgroup, has their own, um, I guess, problems that need to be addressed, and then that's should be as prioritized as standard of living, or but they like to say material conditions. So um the old way of reasoning, the new group says the old way of reasoning, which is based off of your incentives, based off of how you live. You could say material conditions, you could say standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be prioritized over what the different groups want to put as what they believe is higher priority. So the old group is saying material conditions, they believe it's an objective thing. They don't think it's subjective. The new group
Mm-hmm.
think that that is subjective, and people can prioritize other things over that. So it's a battle within. You could call, you can say it's the left. You could call it academic left or what have you.
Mm.
Um,
Another way to look at it
yeah.
is
Hmm.
scapegoating works best on people that are already being oppressed, and scapegoating can work to basically divide the working class, uh, so that they don't see the power structure that's taking away from them. They see, the immigrants, they see whatever, they see somebody taking something away from them other than, the systemic aspect of it. And so you could unite the old and the new Marxist as you kind of lay them out. And I know it's kind of a simplistic way, but you could unite
Hmm.
them in the fact that scapegoating based on race, sex, affiliation, whatever, is really the machinery for the distraction machinery,
Hmm.
preventing you from looking at the material conditions. I have a friend that works at Amazon, and she's trans, and I think I'm going to interview her at some point. She's like a family member basically.
Hmm.
Um, but I have a feeling that, well, of course, she obviously wants her rights. She also is very concerned about the working conditions that she's under as an employee for Amazon. And she's horribly discriminated because she's trans. So it's almost like insult to injury kind of combination. So there's no reason why material conditions and identity shouldn't be tied together in terms of the leverage that's being used to not look at the systemic uh,
Hmm.
uh, extraction of workers' material, basically. I know I'm
Uh,
using material very loosely, but
yeah, I agree with you that the demagoguery and scapegoating
mm-hmm,
is the wild card, is the ace that
mm-hmm,
it's just so effective.
mm-hmm,
Uh, from the perspective of identity, the old left says that, okay, within your identity, you have all of the classes, all of them. So if we were to say trans, if you were to say African American, or what have you, for every identity, there
mm-hmm.
are all of the classes. And so
Right.
now you have the same battle within the identity. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can have exceptionalism, co opting, all kinds of that battle happening within the identity. And then,
Good. Yeah, good
yeah,
point. Yeah, I get you. I hear you.
and so
Um,
that's why you can have um groups that are, it looks like, hey, why are you could say leaders in quotes of that group voting against or moving or saying things that are against their own interests, even though that
mhm,
group is disproportionately lower socioeconomic or something like that. And then that's where
mhm,
the old leftists are like, yep, see, you're just doing the same thing that we already know about.
mm,
That's their view.
mm,
The new view, let's say if you were to just take it out the United States and go to a different country or something like that, you could say that the whole country's being exploited, and it's an identity, our whole ethnicity for a whole region is having priorities that are different than what, let's say, east versus west priorities or something like that. And so they push back and say, nope, we have things that are we don't look at ourselves as being, I don't know, a lower standard of living, but we have these priorities, and who are you to try to tell us that we should prioritize in a left or a traditional left language, workers, material conditions and these types of things. They have totally separate. They could be caring about family. I don't know, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a lot of it's a hard problem to solve. I look at I fall on our traditional left view, but I've looked at some arguments here. Each identity group has its own, like within feminism, there's this whole battle between traditional, like old left and new left, is inside of feminism. It's inside of African American studies. It's inside of all, as far as I see, it's a reoccurring battle. So, and when you bring in self-determination, the right for people to make their decisions that control themselves and their identity, then it just makes it like really you're kind of patronizing somebody if you're saying, well, don't you want to, if you're an old leftist and you're saying, hey, don't you care about these things that care about your standard of living more, then it's kind of you're it's tough. So
I might tie into what you're talking about, the kind of the death of the liberal individual, as those very slight freedoms or compartmentalized freedoms. I think he spoke of his dad as, like after work, or in his lunch break, he would go to the museum and, he'd like to ponder about, kind of the history of technology and metals and all these sort of things. And that was sort of like his limited freedom. But as those get taken away, maybe we tighten our identity politics based on the fact that we feel like we're losing a certain sense of self. And so all we can hang on to is who we are, and who we are is being chipped away as every element, even within the soul, becomes commodified. So that's kind of how I think you could, again, kind of find a sort of unity in the recognition of that process, that as we, even as the middle class loses the American dream, they tighten up onto other things, on and form a different, even like a right wing sort of identity politics. Because we often think of identity politics as being all about the left, but it seems like identities are being peddled pretty hard these days, and fall on different sides of the right left divide. But again, you could look at it as, and this is where I'm kind of with you on being like old school left, as a serious distraction to the bigger picture. But I think we can have both our identities and our material freedom. I don't think they need to be at odds with each other, but I think that they often are, because it behooves those in power to, create as much confusion, whatever flood the zone, as Steve Bannon says, with shit. What's that?
Yeah. I no, yeah, no, yeah. So first, I've enjoyed you guys going back and forth, watching. So Greg, yeah, good stuff, man. I agree with a lot of what you said, and Watson, I'm glad you said the comment about the demagoguery earlier when Greg was speaking, and I learned that term from Watson several years ago. At this point, a long time. I'm not gonna say the number of years because I feel like I'm getting old. But I learned that from him. I was thinking of that. I was like, yeah, there powers that be demagoguery a lot. But Greg, to your last comments, it's like I think that could be a nice solution, honestly, to for the material and the identity, sides to combine to for a common cause. But if for me to, I guess, at the risk of making it a bit more complicated, I think the identities are created for the sake of demagoguery. All three of us have different identities, You know, whether our race, sexuality, whatever, we can pull something out that a lot of other people could identify with, whatever that is. But it may not. The difference is, you know, how much money is gonna be behind that and pushing it. You know, as far as whether you're talking about sexual orientation or ethnicity or even race, what does it even mean to be black? What does it mean to be trans? None of these things are new. Humans have been around for however long you want to say, but they're just now getting popular. The African American or black is just now being defined in the last, what, you know, so 100 years, the last century? If that, maybe I challenge it to even say the last couple of decades. But like that, so then I would say that that identity is a tool of the powers that be that they created. They created by putting that money behind it. And then yeah, we could take our power back by saying, okay, even though you created this identity, even though we do have people who quote unquote identify with that identity, and we're gonna take it and unify from that. I just think it's kind of it's interesting that from my perspective, I think these identities were created because there's an infinite amount of identities. We could probably only name 100 together. I think that's very liberal. I mean, I think I'm being generous. So I don't know. That's how I see it.
All right. Sounds good. All right. I could stay just on this topic for a while, but there's some more. The next one is
I didn't mean to drop the mic, guys. Watson chose to move that. That wasn't that type of moment.
Yeah, it's all good. This next portion is gonna probably I've got some opinions on what's going on over here just because I'm knowledgeable about this space. Josh, I know you are too, so it's gonna be interesting to hear some of the stuff he's saying. I tried to pick some of this apart. Um, so the name of this, it's not chapter but portion. It's called the crypto's false promise. So Yanis Varoufakis, the author, he's done a bunch of debates um on crypto online, and his views are, he lays them pretty bare in this piece. So let's go in and let's see what he has to say. So I'm gonna go ahead and give a high level overview. He gives a background of what he says Bitcoin is and what crypto is. And then he says the initial idea of it. He talks about how it works. And then he goes into the critique. I'm going to try to review this quickly. Um, so he says today's evangelical advocates of crypto technologies, with their faith in Wall Street, cloudless governments, and deep state, the entire techno feudal order can be brought down. So he's saying that crypto people who are evangelical advocates of crypto, they believe that all those groups can be brought down by smart computer code and unhackable proof of work algorithms. And he read the paper, and remember, he's an economist, and he proceeded. He looked and saw that there was an algorithm that allows you to bypass what you could call third parties, untrusted third parties. So instead of having a bank, you don't need a bank. Let's go over here. So the idea of he describes what a normal transaction, and earlier in the book he talked about this, what a normal transaction, what happens with the banks. So when you go through and you buy something with a debit card, there might be 5 or 6 people taking a piece off of that charge, like charging you. It's not just one, there's a bunch. And he describes that. Now with crypto, there's only one charge, right? And he's saying, okay, yeah, this seems like a nirvana, right? And then, well, do you need to have a bank account? Nope, no bank account, no plastic card, no social security number, not even an email account. You just need a private key. So you just got rid of a bunch of things. right? So your private keys, your bank account, social security number, all that, right, rolled up in one. Instead of entrusting the verification of your transaction to a bank or to some other parasitic capitalistic institution, the verification is performed automatically by computers like yours, comprising the common network. So, and then he's going to talk a little bit about how it works. So, these, how does the network work? The machines work together to verify your transaction, and when they do that, in return for that privilege, they get rewarded with a proof of someone and within the group gets rewarded with a proof of work token, a small payment that can be used in the network for future transactions. And the whole kind of you can maybe call it a utopian or nirvana view of it is that it's a cloud-based network that generates no cloud rents. So now he has an overview that and Bitcoin came out of 2008 is when it was first created. It was kind of a I won't say it really first created before that, but say Bitcoin, the author Satoshi Nakamoto was influenced by 2008 to create some alternative to banks. So now let's get into his critique. So the crypto movement, which also had which also initially attracted anarchists, socialists, and socialists, became a supremely volatile currency market. So that's a critique there. Supremely volatile currency market in which anyone sufficiently expert in the new blockchain technology issued their own coins. So whose dollar value they tried to boost before cashing in. Their ideological contempt for fiat state created money turned out to be a ruse for issuing their own fiat money. By the time in 2017, one Bitcoin traded for more than 20,000. The early emancipatory promise of crypto had vanished. So I'm going to tell you that this is wrong. So there's crypto and there's Bitcoin. You cannot issue your own coins in Bitcoin. So he just is just not informed there. But with crypto, like things other than Bitcoin, maybe things that don't follow the same protocols and all that stuff of Bitcoin, then you can. But he's conflating two protocols. There's lots of crypto. You can call it crypto, but what matters is the protocol. And it is confusing, but this isn't Bitcoin, what he's talking about here. But that is a problem. And people just issue, just like the old banks can just, he has a whole chapter about this, but that issue currency and start printing when they want to. Yeah, it's an issue, but that's not a problem with Bitcoin. So, but he does go in and goes back to a critique of Bitcoin here. But he adds in other things about, there's some conflation with crypto, Bitcoin, and what blockchain is. Blockchain is one, of the ways of implementing this elimination of a third party group, a trusted authority. One of the things, we've seen all of the, he has a description of, this is kind of weird why he called it a Bitcoin like string of characters, but using similar blockchain methods, you had the model Kate Moss sold a digital photo of herself in the form of a Bitcoin like string of characters for more than $17,000. Jack Dorsey, the Twitter's chief, raised stakes by selling code linked to an image of the first ever tweet for flatulating, he said. To top of madness, Mike Winkleman, an artist known as Beeple, managed to sell a string of characters linked to a photographic collage of his earlier works for a stunning $69 million. So we have all of these things. You can call them NFTs and all that stuff. None of that's Bitcoin. But he has a problem. He's conflating both of those. So then he comes into this conclusion. So betrayal of the early emancipatory promise was hardwired into the nature of cryptocurrencies. Right. Nakamoto's ambition had been that Bitcoin should take off as a parallel currency. And we can talk about that. To succeed, people would need to want to use Bitcoin to buy train tickets, drinks, and even houses. And we can talk about that. But to engineer the scarcity that he believed was necessary to give Bitcoin value, Nakamoto built into the Bitcoin code a fixed upper limit into the total number of Bitcoins, 21 million to be precise. True. That's true. Its limited supply meant that as soon as the demand for Bitcoin rose, it would exceed it would so would its exchange rate with dollars. At some point, the dollar value of Bitcoin rises above some threshold. It makes sense to keep your Bitcoin and use dollars to buy train tickets, drinks, as well as more Bitcoin, and hope that it will rise further. So he's saying that this is not how a currency should behave. He's implying it was inevitable moment that if Bitcoin became to succeed as a currency, it would stop working like a currency and would in turn instead turn into a pyramid scheme. So this is his more powerful critique, basically saying that if you have a limited amount of supply, you are incentivizing hoarding, and this is like from the beginning of a critique of limited supply. All right, so let's try to get through this. The only true beneficiaries of crypto technologies have been the very institutions that crypto evangelists supposedly aim to overthrow: Wall Street and big tech conglomerates. For instance, JP Morgan, Microsoft want to do a consortium blockchain. And he's saying that, A, they've already figured out how to centralize it and control it, is what he's saying there. So and then he ends with saying blockchain is a fascinating tool. So any comments so far before I go in? All right. I'm gonna go in. So there's some fundamental like conflation that he's not getting here. One of them is that obviously all types of software, there's differences between software. Bitcoin is software, and there's other crypto that could copy Bitcoin or not, but it all gets rolled into one. Like what he's doing is rolling it into one. That kind of infuriates the Bitcoin people. But the crypto, it's true what he was saying. There are all types of scams, lots and lots of scams, decentralized, centralized, all kinds of things. So we already know the whole first part of the book is him talking about how when people just want to print money, that's probably that's a very powerful uh thing that bankers capability that bankers have, and it's been misused, that kind of thing. You probably should have something behind it like gold, that kind of thing. He's already talking about that. That Bitcoin, you can't do that. So he conflated those two things here, and it surprised me that he did that. Now, as far as it, let's go into that was this critique here. So let's see here. So the Nakamoto's ambition that Bitcoin should take off as a parallel currency. So this whole thing here, this is a debate within that community. Currency and money, they're saying that it's two different things. You can call gold sound money, and you can call fiat currency the anything like dollar or whatever. The argument is that the original intent and what it has grown into be is that it's closer to gold. So it's not for buying coffee. It's for doing big exchanges like you would originally with gold. When you didn't want to carry a bunch of gold around, you used currency to represent that gold. that's where notes came from. So that's where the fundamental, that was a debate and a battle. They call it the block size war inside of the Bitcoin community. And it ended up being that the battle was won by the people who wanted it to be gold. And they decided not to make it like Visa, which would be like a currency. They basically said, if we try to be like Visa and try to make it to where everyone can buy everything really quickly and all that, we'll lose, because centralized a centralized database will always be better than the decentralized database in speed. So that's the missing critique or missing I guess knowledge that he has here. But as far as his main point of, is it gonna solve the cloudless taking over? Yeah, no, it's not. But I would go and probably try to critique it a different way, because this is uh mm, I guess knowing about it, it's not that embarrassing, I guess, since yeah, you can kind of forgive him for being ignorant, but he has had debates online. So maybe his view has changed since he wrote this book, but his book is recent. So I don't know. But if this portion of the chapter is written after doing study, then this would be an embarrassing chapter, is what I would say. Because it's pretty wrong. Um, any uh any other comments in there? I know I was pretty strong in what I was saying. Let's move on. We got like 15 more minutes or so. So I'll make a high level comment about the next portion. He has another book, and the other book is called Another Now or something. And this other that the next few portions are about that other, he's imagining another world where everything was kind of fixed. So imagining another now, we won't even go through this. I'd kind of give you the overview. Inside of this other book, he gives a summary. He has imaginary characters that take each viewpoint. So you have kind of like a Marxist character, a banker, and a worker, that kind of thing. And he comes up with a solution. So this is the pushback or the answer of what should we do? And then this kind of makes this book relevant to the meetup groups for software cooperatives, because he says the solution is democratized companies. Lo and behold, and democratize money. So, but let's go with democratize companies first. And any comments so far? All right. So he has the view that, hey, you know, one solution would be a corporation in which every employee has a single share in which that they receive when they're hired. All decisions, hiring, promotion, research, product development, pricing strategy are taken collectively. Whoa, wow, it's a cooperative. So I'll start with this. One of another comment. He is proposing that it would be a kind of a sweeping rule that all corporations would have to be this way. Now, in order for it to work, which that is I guess within a cooperative community, that's kind of the extreme view. Most kind of think it would be more of a mixed. Like if you want to do a traditional corporation, fine. But you should heavily incentivize those corporations that are more democratic, and that would be probably enough. But if you're going to make it illegal to have the other kind of corporation, then pragmatically that might be a problem. And morally, I mean, there's arguments for morally saying that any corporation that is what we would call exploitative should be illegal, but I think it's just so I guess
Subjective.
yeah, subjective. Well, not subjective. I think it's just really if you're arguing from an ethical standpoint, I think it's just too striking, I guess. Shocking. It's too shocking. That what's going around and saying all of it. It's like when you hear the phrase wage slavery, going around and saying every company that is that doesn't have all employees as owners is wage slavery. It's an extreme view. It's just too shocking. So I guess it would fall under not being as pragmatic because it's just shocking. Uh, but I think there's arguments totally for that. But he's taking that view, just saying it's an extreme view. So democratized companies, corporation where each, we already went over that. How does pay work? It's basically democratic. You need to go, well, I'll read these out. Pay is determined by a democratic process that divides a company's post-tax revenues into four slices, one to cover the firm's fixed costs, equipment, and so on, and another set aside for R&D, a slice, and all that stuff. So it's kind of like he's saying, hey, he's trying to, and he's not a businessman. And so he's saying, hey, if we made this into law, this would kind of forestall the pushback of what about if the regular people vote themselves into oblivion and don't really put the money in the right place. I don't, you know, I'm just gonna say that's why he's doing this and trying to say put all that in there. Any proposal to increase one slice must be accompanied by a proposal to reduce the expenditure on one or more of the other slices. So he's trying to make it to where the individuals will not vote themselves into destruction and um, not spend the profit properly. All right.
Man, I think that sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add
Yeah.
something to that.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. For me, I feel like this is such a challenging. That's such a challenging and dangerous approach. Just because, for lack of a better term, like you know, assuming people are too dumb to make their own decisions is an extremely slippery slope.
Yeah.
And everyone's right or correct is not another person's, outside of fact. But even that, but let's not go there. But yeah, and so it's I see why I feel like it's nice to have a template, but it's dangerous. I see it every day now. Our
Yeah.
client.
He goes into later in this chapter, he goes into talking about why communism failed is because it was a top-down solution. And then he says, oh, it needs to be more organic. And then what's interesting is here he's saying, oh, by the way, here's some rigid rules that need to be in place for these companies. And lo and behold, oh, where do those rules come from? Him, right? So it's top down. These traditionally in cooperatives are bottom up. That's how they actually work in real life. Nobody makes these rules. You have to learn the hard way. You're a small company, you don't have all these. You get bigger, you end up saying, oh, you know what, is probably best practice. And you learn from failing, over and over again. So, and that would be the bottom up. Now, if you were to go in and say, let's take the best practices from really existing democratic entities at each size and propose, hey, we're not going to make it illegal if you don't do this, but we're going to incentivize you. You know, you can get loans if you behave this way for each size. I could see something like that. That would be I would accept that as a something in the middle that allows for bottom up. But this here is funny. That he would come in there. But he's kind of basically just saying he's trying to make it. He should have just said that this is what would be how a large company would operate. And maybe he lifted it from something like a Mondragon or something like that. I don't know. But it's like he should have just said, hey, just copy Mondragon. Something like that. But so one of the things that he cares about is eliminating this distinction between wages and profits. Fine. Abolishing the market for shares in companies, and only an employee can own a share in a company. Fine. That's it's cooperatives. Here's something shocking. So most people I know, including generations of students that I've taught, assume that capitalism equals markets. Yes. When you talk to people on the street, they're going to say capitalism and markets are the same thing. And even after you finish saying, there were markets in slavery, there are slavery markets, there are markets in feudalism, they will go and say, oh, yeah, you're right. But then go right back to saying capitalism and markets are the same thing. So that socialism must mean the end of prices as signals, right? So that's central planning of prices to producers and consumers. Okay. Nothing could be further from the truth. Oh, okay. I like that. Capitalist firms are market-free zones within which a non-market process extracts surplus value from employees, which then takes the form of rent, profit, and interest. Oh, right. So this is a controversial claim. It's the one that I've made myself. Right. The larger the firm and the more cloud capital it employs, the greater rents it extracts from a society whose markets malfunction as a result. That's an extra from him. But he's saying, inside the walls of Apple, it's not a market. It's a market-free zone. They set prices, all of that stuff. And what markets are there? The labor market. Right. So this is the exception to the rule of markets are the best at figuring out prices. Well, unless you're inside the halls of Walmart, and where they set prices, or the halls of Apple, or any of these things. So that's his pushback. And he's saying democratize companies. It's not going to be that way for labor. And this would kind of work as a pushback against the Bezoses, the Zuckerbergs, the Musks, all that stuff like that. And he also adds in, as far as this is the specifics of the cloud data side, what about a company, even though it's democratically controlled, what are you going to do about how they manage data? What if they just do the same thing that what and Amazon does? And he's saying, okay, no, app developers needing our data would have to pay to get it from consenting users who are protected by a bill of digital rights that guarantees us all the rights to choose which are data to sell and to whom. Right. So that's that whole democratized companies piece. Any comments, questions? I will say that that's not as controversial. Let's get through this democratized money part, which I do think is controversial. He goes ahead and says, let's try to get through this in 10 minutes or so. Central bank provided, you have a central bank that provides everyone with a free digital wallet. Okay. And effectively a free bank account. All right. To attract people to use it, a stipend or basic dividend is credited monthly to each account, making universal basic income a reality. Oh, all right. So he's doing the universal basic income. All right. And to take a step further, central bank pays interest to those who shift monies from their savings at commercial banks to their new digital wallet. Okay. And would this not require a central bank to mint vast amounts of money? Okay, what about the minting problem? Yes, the stipends will have to be minted anew, though not at a rate that exceeds the quantities central banks have been minting since 2008. So he's saying, yeah, well, we're already minting. So let's just do it and give it to the people. All right, fine. This turns central banks from pliant servants of the private bankers to something like a monetary commons. So he's saying that people are going to be able to control the money in some way. All right. What about investment? Um, so this is a classic problem with like cooperatives. So in this system, you can lend your savings to a startup or to a mature firm, but you can't buy a chunk of the firm. Keyword lend. You can lend, so you don't own it, and they can pay you back, and it's like basically a loan. What about taxation? And he's saying, I'm gonna summarize. There is no tax except for on companies. So no income tax on individuals, any of that stuff. Right. So he's saying there's three types of income only companies will pay. Let's see. So every company pays a fixed tax on all revenues. Oh, that's the other controversial thing. So he's saying it's on revenue, not on profit. So if you made $1 million and you had $1 million of losses that year, too bad. You're still paying tax on the $1 million. So that not gonna fly. But he's saying that will get rid of the loopholes. That's its own battle. Let's get rid of this. This is extra. International trade. He's saying, like World Bank and so on and so forth. That would be controlled more democratically, instead of having it to where, and this kind of goes towards his own, where he's the finance minister of Greece. Basically, they took loans and then they were being scammed or exploited, let's say. He's saying that the people would have a better, more power over that. And that's basically it. He does another review. So, any questions so far on that or comments on that portion?
Um, I mean, I think it's a good idea, but to have a democracy on the world stage, let's get it with the people first, in one country.
Yeah.
Yeah, ideally, yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, he has some extra on there, but we probably won't be able to get into it. As they say, for decades, developing countries were undermined whenever smart money detecting future economic growth, for example, South Korean, Thailand, and African countries, rushed in to buy land and companies before the price went up. As the money inflows surged, the prices of land and companies skyrocketed, and false expectations regarding the level of growth set in, thus inflating bubbles. The moment the bubbles burst, as they inevitably do, the smart money rushed out of the country faster than it had rushed in, leaving nothing but ruined lives and economies behind. The purpose, therefore, of the surge levy, that's what he's saying that needs to be implemented as a surge levy, is to tax these speculative money movements to stop unnecessary damage to the weakest countries. There it is. I'm just going to say that's one of the things he implements. So kind of similar to like capital gains in the first year versus after. Like, oh, well, no, you're going to punish you if you're going to be moving money that fast. Fine.
Is he talking about like at an IMF level at this
Yeah.
point, right? He's okay. All right.
Yeah. he's calling it the countries. He's calling that there's just a one account for the whole country, and he's calling it the Cosmos account. Uh, right. So all trade and all money movements between different monetary jurisdictions like UK, Germany, China, and the United States are denominated in a new digital international accounting unit, which he calls Cosmos. If the Cosmos value of a country's imports exceed its exports, the country is charged an imbalance levy in proportion to its trade deficit. So he has some definitely, obviously, he's gonna have. I mean, he's a big macro guy, so he's gonna have all these views. Any other comments? All right. Um. So yeah, the last pieces of this, he goes into he gives an overview of what it would be like to live in this world where you're more democratically involved and you have more decision making power, and like it's this is a another battle. It's called participatory democracy. It's a book that we reviewed, one book that we reviewed, and it's a difficult problem to solve, how to get people to participate more um in political science. The assumption, I guess I don't want to call it assumption, the empirical evidence is that people are apathetic when it comes to democracy. When it comes to voting, they don't want to be involved. Uh, so there has to be some type of incentive system or some type of reduction of friction in order to keep people involved. Uh, so it seems like he didn't really say any of that, but it seemed, how he had his how he envisioned it was it, the way that you all of your interaction with your social media, there would be incentive systems that would incentivize you to pay attention to different, like your local municipality and other municipalities, and you may be compensated for participating in voting and all these other things. So there's that. And I mean, he goes into how you're going to do commercial zoning in your area. He has some interesting things there. But that's basically it. So I'll read one of these things. Um, every time you visit a media center outside of your area, a tiny payment leaves your central bank account, and it helps fund the good people who offer you a window into their world. No ads, no behavioral modification algorithms. As for these tiny payments, they are insignificant in comparison to basic dividend paid to you by the central bank. Besides, paying them makes you feel good, right? So they buy you and everyone else civilization. They offer you a bay window into the world, cooperative media centers strewn all over the planet, trying their hardest to provide good, diverse, exciting information, knowledge, and a touch of wisdom as to your local media outlet. It advertises its wares. Yeah. So it's like these somehow trying to address how do you get information, and it would be more of a function of, I would say, this system in government of how participatory democratic information is disseminated. It would have to be part of the system instead of it just being left to private industry. Any questions there? Um, he goes into the one portion talking about a cloud rebellion. So how would we mobilize, so on and so forth. He gives a background of traditional unions and how they got together, and it would be it has to be as far as a cloud mobilization, it would have to be mostly online and incentivize a different way. Um, he has an interesting idea. He said, inspired by WikiLeaks, I imagine a group of rebels writing and uploading digital viruses whose purposes would simply be transparency to trace and reveal the world the hidden digital connections between cloudless government agencies and bad actors like fossil fuel companies, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like, yeah, kind of the Robin Hoods are good guys that are kind of operating outside of the law. Possibly that could take form, but it's just like a idea. And I think I mean, he basically closes saying that we're going to have to do things totally different than how the old school socialists uh, were maneuvered in order to combat the cloudless. So yeah, that's it. That's the last chapter. Any comments?
I had go ahead.
Go for it. No, you got it, Greg.
Okay, yeah. It's actually Gage, Gage, but everyone calls me Greg.
Oh,
So
sorry about
it's
that.
all good. It's all good.
Yeah, I misread that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I get Gabe, I get Greg, I get Gage. Anyway, one thing that I guess I had a little trouble with here is, it seems like in his description, he's very careful in certain areas and not as careful in others, but that he's missing the element of how key education is in this. And I think that's what maybe you were speaking about, the dangers of the sort of voting system, because things can go in pretty weird directions if people aren't informed, as we're kind of seeing in this country. So I think that could be an element that he could have spent a little more time on. And the reason why I think he would be inclined to is when he talks about the liberal self and that construction of the liberal self and the kind of wearing away at it. All of that stuff is learned, and I don't mean education in the kind of straight up sense. I mean more we grow up in this culture and we learn what it means to be a person. And obviously, if you look at the vast anthropological or ethnographic surveys of different cultures, there's personhood is something that is learned and learned in different ways. So it seems like with any kind of system that he's talking about, and some sort of resistance, that an education and orientation would have to be key. And another element, and this is a slightly different one, but maybe this was my read on the book. I think you mentioned that when it comes to democratizing companies, that it needed to be kind of broad, like all companies needed to be democratized. But I thought he was kind of also saying that if you started with one company, it would be sort of like an asteroid hitting the cloud capitalists or the technofeudalists. And so I'm kind of wondering out loud whether that was kind of the point of activism, in that if one company started to go that way, the incentive structure would be such that people would go, yeah, I want that because that's working. That's giving me what I want. Because we still reason very much from the individual perspective. I mean, that is what it means to be, kind of a Westerner and post-Enlightenment being. So it's like you got to work with the cultural resources that you have. And I guess that's my question. The broader question is, could some of these changes be implemented by, like taking one company and doing the treatment that he speaks of? I mean, I know we have cooperatives, and I'm wearing my Bob's Red Mill shirt right now, which Bob, when he retired, handed the whole company to his workers. And I don't know if you ever bake bread, but it's a product that's in every store, pretty much, definitely Whole Foods. And it was gifted to the workers. And I went and visited their establishment, and it had a really awesome sort of feel to it. So I'm wondering if these counter examples and counter ways of running a business could be something that could be contagious. and could, in a sense, be an island in this techno-feudalist system. So those are kind of my two big thoughts. Education in the broader sense of what it means, kind of selfing, and whether he's giving us the ingredients that could happen on more of a contagious level rather than a totalizing level. Like, I think when you say, from above, and I think that's often the reading that the Soviets had of Marx. I think Marx himself is much less dogmatic about things and more experimental, especially when he says stuff like, the last thing I'd ever want to be considered as a Marxist, coming from Marx. Yeah, so those are two kind of observations I made.
Yeah, I think he had that quote in here from
Mhm.
Marx where he wanted
did he?
to be bottom up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Think
And
he
thank
did.
you, by the way, for the awesome summary. I really always appreciate these. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah. So the first one with the education, that's a whole field. So like that
Mhm.
whole participatory democracy, we did the review, Carol Pateman. We were advised, or it was a book that was requested by a political scientist professor SMU.
Mhm.
And there's a whole section. I mean, it does a history of trying to get more engagement. It does a history of democracy. It does a history of the views of democracy, contemporary, and all that. Very shocking for someone off the street to saying, "Oh, there's a such thing as empirical study of democracy." Yes, and what are the findings there? Shocking. Oh, okay. Uh, and then education. She goes through that. That's a whole chapter. Can education get people to participate more in democracy? The fundamental problem is apathy. Does education get people to participate more other than vote and leave, and even vote, but just vote and leave? The number one thing empirically that gets people to participate more is efficacy. If they see that it matters, they will participate. If they don't see it matters, they won't. And so then it morphed into, how do you get people to see that their participation matters in decision making process? And it has a whole fascinating breakdown on participation and what that means in the decision making process. And so the education part ends up being kind of more of a pragmatic, living the decision making and seeing it have efficacy, and then they participate more. And so if you were to include all of that in your education, then yeah. If it was, I went to school and learned about education, she marked it low as something that will have people participate based off the empirical studies they were doing. So the thing that was the biggest effect on having someone to participate in a democratic, like a decision making process, was having them have a democratic process at work, and people tend to engage more. So that was the argument for having a democratic work environment, that kind of thing, where participation actually is binding, let's say.
Do
So
you
you had
remember
that
him
side.
mentioning? Do you remember him mentioning that these companies needed to be relatively small? And maybe I'm reading this into what he's saying, that maybe in order to see democracy working, it has to happen on a smaller level. Like he said, companies to be under 200 people. That's what that.
Mhm.
No.
I don't actually remember him saying that it would have
I'm
to
sorry,
start
him,
small. Or
Giannis. Yeah.
yeah,
I haven't read this
Giannis.
other book, but it sounds really interesting. I'm really interested in incentive structures.
Yeah. No, I don't remember him saying it.
Okay.
Yeah, so if it's starting small, obviously, if it would be a sweeping change, then it makes sense. The thing is that he's an economist, and so he's gonna have a
Mhm.
strong opinion. There's political scientists that all they study is democracy, And economists are actually really bad at empirical judgments, and
True.
studying democracy. So it's kind of people have a simplified view of of um of the political process or democratic decision making process. And I would argue that the decision making process probably should be left, or you'll find more rigorous study on the political science side when it comes to getting people to participate. Now they have plenty of arguments for that just agree and go in line. I'm sure that he's read the, some of this literature I'm talking about in order to come up with this chapter of where he's saying, yeah, let's have democratized companies, because he's really stretching himself thin, saying, hey, here's how business should work, and he's an economist, right? It's not a businessman. And here, here's how the political process should work. Yeah, he's an economist, he's not a political scientist, right? So he's having to synthesize a lot of stuff, put it all together. So he can be forgiven for that. What was the second thing you were saying? Was the education, and the second one was what was it?
The idea of starting smaller, and
Yeah.
if you were to build something that really worked, let's call it a charter company, like a charter school. When people see something really working and they feel it from a lived experience perspective, that seems to be one of the most powerful ways of really getting people hyped
Yeah.
up and jazzed about something.
Yeah.
It's like you take anything that actually works in this world, and it can spread in spite of other factors that might suppress it. So that seems to me, rather than taking a totalizing approach of like every company needs to be democratized, you'd actually your activist approach would be, if we make one that really works and utilizes some of these kind of techie technologies that like he's giving us the history of technologies that have moved in different directions. I mean, he spoke of the internet in its kind of early stages when there was a lot of hope. So there's nothing to say that we couldn't go back to some of those moments and, in a sense, cultivate them on a micro level. And by micro, I mean a company that's 200 people or so. And that could, inspire people to want that sort of political, economic, governing structure.
Yeah.
I think part of his, where he parts from being like a typical Marxist or socialist is he really is saying we're starting on the company level, which, from what I've read, you don't hear much of that in socialism. I mean, maybe you do on a practical labor level, but I'm always excited about the idea that we have these technologies, and it's often how we engage them, and a lot of times the powers that be determine how they're engaged. But what if you did it on a smaller level? Like, for example, in farming, if you took some of the modern techniques and contemporary knowledge in agriculture, and I'm not talking about industrial agriculture, I'm talking about kind of more of the permaculture perspective, combined with technologies that basically make farming less labor, then you could have a microcosm of a different agrarian system that's benefiting from our current technological state. And that might serve as a model for something larger. That's just an example, but coming at it from that angle is what I was thinking.
Yeah. I think that there are examples in the United States, definitely, in say other places like Spain. Cooperatives are actually quite popular. There's a lot of them, and if you look worldwide, there are techno cooperatives, software cooperatives, large ones we're talking about in the United States. There's one we did a book review long years ago, um, on, and I'm forgetting the name of the company, but they make software that handles electrification, like electric companies, everything that has to do with their inventory and all of that stuff. And a lot of those electric companies are, they themselves are cooperative. So they made software and shared it amongst themselves. And they do decently. It was actually reviewed. That book was actually written by a professor at UT. Um, but the largest cooperative would be Mondragon. You know, like I think there's like 160,000 people, that kind of thing. They're kind of best in class group in a lot of what they do in Spain. Um, but I will say that as far as the there was a debate, and I'm forgetting the name of the prominent libertarian versus um oh, there's a bunch of debates on cooperatives and all that. The one I'm talking about, okay, yeah, there's one between Richard Wolff and yes, so I think it's Richard Wolff and the Whole Foods founder. He's actually um kind of pretty anti-cooperative. He wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism. And so he has that side, you know, he wants to be, have conscious capitalism on, but he said that he tried cooperatives at first and he don't like them. And so they were debating cooperatives or not. And one of the arguments that like there's, he's not pure libertarian, but you know, traditional capital and then also libertarian is reoccurring in a lot of debates, is that we already have a system that you can have cooperatives in. We already have one. You can have cooperatives in the United States. It works. And they say it hasn't caught on. The cooperatives have been around for a while. Um, Democratic companies have been around for a while, and he's saying that they haven't caught on. Um, and so why is that? But it doesn't really matter. It's not illegal to make them. And so the pushback is that they're not incentivized enough. Traditional entities are incentivized too much, whereas the other entities, like cooperative entities and other entities that you might find in a place like a Germany, where they have after a certain size, you can have the workers can put someone on the board and all this other stuff through voting and all that. So more democratic that way, but not all the way like a cooperative. All of these incentive schemes, they're not in the United States. So, you know, one that Richard Wolff brings up is that, say, in Italy, you know, for unemployment insurance, you know, you can collect your unemployment insurance, or 10 of you can get together and then you could forego your unemployment insurance and get a loan from the government to start a cooperative. That would be an incentive scheme. And why would you want to do that for cooperatives? Like, so on the libertarian side, you would say, hey, just let the best group win. Well, with the cooperative thing, if you want to incentivize small business, which is what we always say that we want to do here in the United States, it seems like you should err on the side of of getting groups to take it upon themselves to go into business, right? And so that part is where the argument would be, why wouldn't you do that? And it's because, most likely it's because traditional business schemes are preferred here, and they shouldn't be, right? There should be a more incentive scheme on the cooperative side, or anything that gets people to work together to do business. So but yeah, I guess the whole thing is like, there's already, you know, there's examples. Yeah. As far as large ones is what I'm thinking. Small ones, you know, they're all over the place. I mean, we're a software cooperative ourselves. So, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it. And